trying to get the OGs, the folks who are legacy, the folks who made things happen. Of course, we're passing on to the new generation right now. I mean, we lost Eddie Lepp this last year. We lost
Yeah.
Jack Hare years ago in regards to that is concerned. And there's been a lot of turnover and changeover. We had Steve Bloom on last week. He was a great guest to talk about all the people who got this whole industry started. But who I have here now is the next generation of the OG, as far as that's concerned. He's a sub boomer, so I don't mind that. And Jason has a very interesting story in regards to how he happens to be one of the longest running retailers in the country. Started in California when it was just barely legal, and it was the Wild Wild West that was just starting to be tamed.
Mhm.
Is the Wild Wild West tamed back in California yet?
I mean, I think it's an ongoing evolution.
So where does you see the evolution right now? How far have we gotten past Prop 215 that made things go as far as it is right now?
I think if you look at it as proposition passage of Proposition 215, I kind of use this analogy to paint that as like basically that was the baby, the birth of the baby for the industry, so to say. And so now it's been, you know, let's see, 96, 20 plus years.
Yep.
So that's we're like basically um, our industry is basically just old enough to actually consume cannabis and consume alcohol legally.
But talk about for a
So
minute your evolution into the use of cannabis for health reasons, and why and how what you see happening in California in the future as we continue to evolve.
most definitely. So I was born with cerebral palsy and used cannabis to treat symptoms that I have from cerebral palsy. And I am the longest continuous retail operator of cannabis in the United States. I started owning dispensaries back in 2001 and started off in San Francisco. I was at 442 Haight Street, in between Nicky's and the Top on Haight Street, and the corner adjacent was Fillmore. And so that's a pretty popular intersection, nostalgic intersection from traditional drug culture through over the years.
Is that pretty close to where Burner got started too over there?
Um, he is on the upper Haight. That's the
Okay.
nicer part of Haight. I was on the more hood part of Haight. Yes, yes. But no, Gil used to come into the store back in the day, and he got his start with the hempery over on Geary Street that was run by Kathleen Lemons. And then later he went over to the Green Door that was ran by my buddy Andrew. And so it's been an ongoing evolution from that space. But where we are today, I mean, it's amazing. We have adult use sales, very growing market in California. We do have a big political problem in the sense that we have given all of the local municipalities local control. So there is a lot of what you would call desert cities or desert counties, even that have zero type of cannabis access for their general population. And so that presents a really interesting problem because when Californians voted for Proposition 64, they all assumed that they would have cannabis easily ready available in their communities or at least in a neighboring community close by.
I noticed that when we went adult use in California, and I'm sorry, I can't use the word recreational because I still hear it being used
It's terrible.
in regards to heroin.
It's recreational is just not the right word to use with cannabis. I mean, we have a Department of Parks and Recreation. Recreational activities are typically events, things that you do with the family, and so we want to make sure that we're sending a clear and present message that this is for adults. This is adult use, and therefore the word recreational, I feel, just is just attractive to minors.
And of course, the LA Sheriff's Office, the first day you started with full adult use in California, had that huge campaign, "Get Baked, Get Booked."
Yes, yes, they did. They did run a campaign, but the reality of it is arrests are extremely low in that department in my opinion. Not to say that they should be higher, but as far as in LA, we have real crime, and just smoking weed is not a real crime. There's no victim, and so we places where we have real crime, this should never be the issue.
So did the Cole memo actually have a difference in regards to how cannabis law evolved in the West Coast?
You know, it's funny is people bring up the Cole memo all the time, but I don't think the Cole memo was anything, never did anything, and never protected anybody because the Cole active, or the Cole memo was a directive. It was not there was no teeth behind it. It was just saying, hey, you guys should operate like this and you should do this and that. It wasn't a clear anything with any teeth. I was a finance chairman and point person on cannabis policy and messaging for Congressman Rohrabacher, and together we came up with the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, and that is the federal appropriations bill that prohibits the DOJ and DEA from extrapolating federal funds to go after state licensed cannabis businesses. And that is the single piece of legislation that has allowed the industry to grow to what we all see it as today nationwide.
Now, I was not always a fan of Dana Rohrabacher. Old surfer dude, give him that. But and we don't see eye to eye on everything. But the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment, in its various capacities and the way that it was slipped into the law through the various budgets and things of that sort, really did a lot to secure the federal attitude towards cannabis as far as state laws being upheld.
Yeah, and you know who was the Speaker of the House the first time that was introduced and passed?
Boehner?
John Boehner.
Yeah, I used to live in Cincinnati. His family owned the bars over just north of me.
Yep.
So I bumped into him at the Children's Hospital. He was going around making the rounds.
Nice.
And
nice.
Lovely gentleman. I don't know what he's doing right now with Acreage. Is he backed out of Acreage?
Oh, Acreage is a mess. Acreage is a mess. Let's stick to positive stuff.
Okay, let's see now. That means we can't talk about MedMen. We can't talk about Aurora.
I mean, there's probably about 80% of the industry you can't talk about.
Yeah, even Canada has had their problems.
Canada is just the biggest boof market, biggest boof exporter on the planet.
All right, so let's talk about boof. I mean, that is a topic that I am concerned about because of the fact that I love craft grows.
Mm-hmm.
I love the love that goes into craft grows.
Me too.
I mean, the phyto hunting and the way that they grow the plant to make certain you've got maximum terpenes,
yes,
and minimum powdery mildew, neem oil, everything else they tend to throw into an Eagle 20, which was a nice little bonus from California.
Eagle 20 has great terps.
I'll knock you through the damn roof. I mean, I was a guy who was affected by paraquat back in 1979. I was
interesting.
I was at the Hash Bash in Ann Arbor just to say hi to John Sinclair. And they passed me a joint, and it tasted a little funny, but me and all my buddies were coughing up blood that night.
Yep. The first time I had ever even heard of paraquat. I mean, I've always sold brown weed in the beginning, and even in the early days of the dispensary days, I sold a lot of brown weed as well. And you know, there's a market for that and people that wanted that. And I had one guy that would come in and buy a quarter pound of Brammer weed every week. And one week he came in and he tried to tell me that there was paraquat on the weed. And I was looked at him like, what in the hell are you even talking about? Like, what the hell even is that? I had never even heard of it in my life. I'm like, what are you talking? He's like, it's contaminated. I'm like, how come no one else has said anything and it's only you saying this? And so we didn't really take him very seriously, but God only knows what was in Mexican brickweed back then.
Well, I can tell you that in the college newspapers, there was an ad taken out by the federal government, and it was almost a half-page ad. It said, "Do you have paraquat in your weed? Send us a sample with a self-addressed stamped envelope, and we will send you the test results so you know where you can go ahead and smoke the rest of your weed."
So
none of us fell for that shit.
So they were encouraging the illegal transport of marijuana back then.
Exactly, by post. And I mean, I always just was amazed that they were that stupid that we would actually fall for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I already had an FBI file on myself for being seditious.
Yeah.
Just because of the fact that I didn't like the guy who was the head of the student government, who was just in it just for the thing on his resume. Mm-hmm. But I was considered seditious and an anarchist, and so I didn't need anything else on my record.
I know the feeling. I've been raided by the Drug Enforcement Administration 3 times. Once under President Bush, twice under Obama. And, I fought pretty much every single governmental agency that you can find on the federal and state level in California throughout these years of creating this industry.
I am still surprised that the Marijuana Elimination Project is still even being funded by the federal government. Yeah. There's still money going out there to go ahead and find crops wherever they are and burn them, even if there's somebody standing right in the middle of the
Well,
damn
I think
crop.
most of that is illegal grows that are on like national park lands. I think that's where most of that funding is actually going to, and these people are devastating these camp areas and rerouting the water and taking away from our natural resources. So I'm actually for that. I don't want our parks to be diminished because everybody just wants to have free rent to trap.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of like what the old hooch they used to grow in the Appalachians,
Yeah,
and always had to kind of hide it underneath the canopy, so to speak.
yeah.
And it's still out there.
Hmm.
But we're supposedly transitioning now from those times where you could be raided on a regular basis for any reason, and for some odd reason, a lot of that stuff never got put into storage. It just got absorbed by law enforcement.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of great videos of the stores being raided in California, and they just grab the stuff and they throw it in their car.
Oh,
I don't think
it's
that they were
such a
bagging and
nightmare.
tagging it.
It's such a nightmare, bro. It's such a nightmare. And they would make such a mess too. Like they would just they would open like fruit cups that were in the refrigerator that were just like staff treats and whatnot, and like just throw them on the walls. And like for what purpose? You know what I mean? And smashing and they're breaking everything, and and there's absolutely zero recourse you have.
So here is California, who was the first state really to get any kind of a scaled up cannabis program in the medical industry back in 1996.
Hmm.
And yet there was still a high degree of enforcement at that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. So 1996, medical cannabis passes in November. Dan Lundgren was the attorney general at the time in California, and he had an emergency meeting with all of the district attorneys throughout the state of California. And the focus of that meeting was not how do we make this law work, but the focus was how do we make this law not exist. And how they did that is because in Proposition 215, illegally licensed you to be able to possess, consume, and cultivate cannabis. The one word that they forgot that they left out of Prop 215 and gave the law enforcement kind of the upper hand in this was transportation.
Yeah,
Is it?
transportation is still an issue, is it not?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, not in the regulated market. I mean, it's more of a logistical issue, and under these extremely high Joe Biden gas prices, it makes it even more um, counterproductive as far as on the distributor side. But at the same time, that is just the cost that we have to absorb in order to do business and keep the industry trucking along the way it should.
Now, here we are at Kushcon, which is a convention related to hemp, which was made legal and taken off the schedule in the 2018 Farm Act.
Yes.
And and they managed to get their rules and regulations knocked out practically in about a year by contacting all the states. Some states got rejected. I don't know which ones, but most everybody were able to create good laws, and yet we have a whole industry here that is still having problems with transporting their hemp across state lines.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't really be that difficult. I mean, I think probably one of the biggest things is within the testing and a lot of people growing hot hemp. Because the reality is, you can't just tell a plant, "Hey, don't grow any stronger than zero point 0.3 THC." Like plants don't have ears; they don't listen in that type of a respect. So, I think that's probably more of the bigger problem than people figuring out how to move it around. Is figuring out what type of remediation practices they need to institute before they actually do transport hot hemp and then put themselves at serious risks of felony charges.
Now, they put a lot of emphasis on hot hemp, and yet they don't pay a lot of emphasis on the custodialship of the samples, how they're sampled, how they're transported, and how long it takes to get to the lab, and how long it sits there can make a big difference because they're not flash freezing
Yeah,
the buds.
there's no metric, there's no biotrack for hemp. It's just plant it, grow, harvest it, sell it.
And by the time we get to the lab, sometimes your THC has gone above that zero point 0.3. Why
Yep.
can't they just bring it up to 0.1 and give it all a break?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is that the THC number is a very arbitrary number and actually doesn't make scientific or legislative sense. The reality of it is that when Mitch McConnell created the Farm Bill, he actually legalized cannabis across the country. All right. And that's why we like to joke and call him Marijuana Mitch. But the reality of it is that in the Controlled Substances Act, when it refers to the Farm Bill as cannabis or as hemp, it all has the same definition of cannabis sativa L, meaning it is all the same plant. So the only thing differentiated between a weed plant and a hemp plant is a zero point 0.3 THC in a final form of flowering, and that just doesn't make any type of legislative sense. And all it does is provide interesting ways for law enforcement to still be able to get their quotas met enforcing on these types of things.
Well, speaking of legislation, I mean, since 1970, there has been almost 250 bills that have come out to try to remediate the impact of the Controlled Substance Act, Title II, which of course is what we have to deal with. And I I see that we have issues about it that are continuing on a regular basis, but we have new bills that actually are starting to get some traction, at least in the House, not quite the Senate, although I'm interested to see what you think about the COA and you see if it has the pieces that you think we need to move it forward by combining with the bills that are in the House and actually getting to conference.
So in regards with the CAOA,
CAOA. Yeah.
CAOA, I think it is a good start. I actually prefer Nancy Mace's bill that she released that Amazon actually endorsed. And
States Reform Act.
yes, States Reform Act. I'm more of a supporter of that. I think that's a more comprehensive piece of legislation. The taxes in the CAOA are just erroneous and outrageous. They are calling for a 15% excise tax on cannabis, and that scaling up to 25% over 5 years.
And that is a tax on the raw materials before they go to processing to be created into retail consumer
No, that's
packaged
final
goods.
form. That's final form.
That's the final form.
That's a
Okay.
final form tax. Yeah, final form excise tax, 15%. That is just ridiculous. Ridiculous. And that you people wonder why in the regulated market why cannabis is so high. Well, I mean, in California you can go and you can be paying in the amount of taxes on your product anywhere from 40 to 55% taxes depending on what jurisdiction you are purchasing in. First of all, we have a state excise tax of 15% in California. However, that is actually a 27% excise tax because it's based off of 80% of the retail value because they used a language called arm's length transaction
Right.
in the legislation. And so that is what makes your 15% actually 27%. And now they just got rid of the cultivation tax and they're saying that in 3 years they are going to raise the excise tax to 19%, which we will be over 30% excise tax because they did not remove the language of the arm's length transaction when they removed the cultivation tax,
So
which they should have.
the cultivation tax.
They
but
needed to.
They scaled the other one up.
They had to remove the cultivation tax. The reality of it is this is that cultivation tax is the only cultivation tax in the nation of any industry of anything that is agriculturally produced.
I mean, let's be clear. The very first person who ever got arrested for cannabis in the country was arrested for not paying his cultivation tax of $3.
Well, yeah, that's when they had the tax stamp, right? You had to buy the tax
the
stamps.
tax stamp from the marijuana tax act
Yeah,
of
tax stamps.
1937.
And then you put a tax stamp on your bag of weed that you would sell, and you could still get arrested for selling that bag of weed.
He did not pay the $3 tax and was charged $2,000
Yes.
in remuneration. Couldn't afford it, so he went to jail.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Little
Crazy.
White Farmer. That was the guy that was arrested first.
Yes.
And then they came after you.
Well, I think actually the first person ever arrested for cannabis was Baca and Caldwell case. I think that was the first people ever arrested for cannabis.
I teach a class on cannabis law, and it's interesting how every time that they created a law, they had unintended consequences that really screwed things up. Like, for instance, the first time the Tax Act went into place, they found out that people who were committing violent acts were getting their sentences lessened because the basis of the law stated that cannabis was making people into violent criminals.
Yeah,
And so therefore
it's
they were not. They had the mens rea situation.
yeah, it's like watching Laura Ingraham all over again. It's just ridiculous. I mean, the reality of it is this: is that cannabis does not cause psychosis. If you already are someone who would be vulnerable of suffering from psychosis, I mean, you could drink coffee, you could drink soda, that could give you psychosis to people that are already predisposed to this type of condition. And yes, if you are predisposed to this type of condition, you should not use cannabis because cannabis could do that. But the portion of the population that affects is so minor and so minute, it shouldn't even be a talking point on the news.
But it is, and we continue to move forward. So, do you see in the near future the SAFE Act moving forward, and you think it's a good thing?
The what?
The SAFE Act.
The SAFE Act
The one
in
that-
Florida.
No, the SAFE Act nationally.
Are you referring to safe banking?
The Safe Banking Act, yeah.
Yes.
You got to be careful because
I
there's
am
a SAFE
a
Act, which is I think it's called the Save the American Forgotten Equines.
I am a big supporter of safe banking. I, I, we need safe banking. It's something that is necessary. Not to mention, too, legislatively, it is the thing that is the farthest along in the legislative process. It has the most likelihood of having bipartisan support to pass.
Yeah, six
and
times.
and the reality of it is that all of this infighting that the cannabis industry is doing by not getting behind something that actually can pass and us getting a victory is actually showing that the cannabis industry is not politically astute enough or mature enough to actually be ready for full legalization.
They actually managed to put it into a bill which was not a cannabis bill the last time,
Mhm.
and it was not the straight budget bill. It was the America Competes Act,
Yes.
which is basically there to keep ourselves competitive with China, who was the reason we originally had a cannabis law in the first place because they had an opium problem, and we told them we'd fix it, and they said, but you don't have an opium law in the United States. How can you tell us that we need a law? So,
And now they're funneling all the fentanyl to our streets.
yeah, exactly right.
It's a shame.
Now, I know a lot of folks who are worried about what they call unintended consequences of letting the baking industry take over the funding in regards to cannabis. And do you see that as an issue in regards to, for instance, small businesses, minority businesses who might be redlined by the banks?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
As far as the SAFE Act is concerned,
Safe banking.
Yeah, Safe Banking Act.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're wondering if there's going to be any unintended consequences of the banking industry taking over funding for, say, for instance, small businesses that would be possibly redlined by the banking industry, or should it be put all on the Small Business Administration?
Um, when it comes in regards with safe banking, one of the main reasons I'm a supporter of it is because it's going to give us as small business owners the ability to get into the mainstream financial system as far as accepting credit cards, not having to keep as much cash on site, making us less targets by criminals that are looking for an opportune act, so to say, where they know that there's high levels of cash. Not to mention, too, these businesses will be able to obtain loans through the banks, which we currently can't do. We have to go and raise capital through different types of investors, and a lot of those sometimes are predatory investors, and so it makes for this unsavory business relationship in order that is caused because we don't have safe banking. We can't have access to proper capital to actually grow the industry that any other industry would be able to access.
And that would actually allow us to start actually trading more on the larger indexes of the American Stock Exchange.
No, it will not do that. No.
Okay, so we'll still be stuck with the CSE, with the CSE.
The Canadian Stock Exchange?
Yes.
No one wants to be on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Everyone knows that's a joke.
But that's where we're trading right now.
Well, the reason that we're trading there is because we don't have federal legalization, so that way we can trade on the NASDAQ and the U.S. marketplaces. Mm-hmm. And so you have this cannibalism of U.S. companies wanting to be public and going and becoming Canadian companies, even though they're operating in the U.S. And now that GDP is counting towards Canada's GDP and not the U.S. GDP, and that's a big problem.
It's all a matter of percentages at that point.
Correct.
In the long line.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the big question everybody's been asking me, I'll ask you the same one. How long do you think it'll be before we get federal legalization?
So people ask me that all the time, and my
And
answer
I'm one
is
of them.
is I don't care how long it takes. That to me doesn't matter, because every time people say this, you're going to say within 10 years. Okay, 5 years down the line, you're still going to say within 10 years. Okay, and so the time doesn't matter. What is the most important thing is the how that bill is written, how we are allowed to commence in commerce, how we are able to deliver our products to consumers, whether or not we have interstate trade, whether or not we are hampered down in a prohibitionist market space of not allowing commerce across state lines. These are all the big, finite, infinite questions that need to be hashed out in the final bill. This is one of the main reasons why I support the States Reform Act, is because that would allow for interstate trade. I believe that that's what the industry needs in order to be able to scale and be more cost productive. Not to mention, California is the largest brand name in cannabis in the entire world. And so when you think about it, California has been providing close to 80% of the world's cannabis for the last 80 years. And so it is one of the largest exports that we will be able to have as well under a federal legalization bill.
And by the way, having California in your name or close to it doesn't help. Just ask the folks over at California.
Whose?
They crashed and burned.
I've never heard of them.
It's a matter of following the money. It happened over here.
That's probably why I've never heard of them, because they didn't do anything.
Well, I told folks at the very beginning when they're writing the laws, you have to follow the money to find out where the origin is.
I agree with that. Follow the money. I'm a big supporter of that.
Okay.
Big supporter.
Jason Beck, I want to thank you for stopping by here today over here at Kushcon. I wish you a safe trip back to Los Angeles and all the new shows coming up. Where are you going to be next?
I'm going to go, hang out with some friends, do what I do, smoke the best weed in the world, and, enjoy Florida, because it's beautiful weather out here. I love coming to Florida. I love the people out here in Florida, and I can't wait to be part of some type of operation that is really kicking ass and taking numbers out here in Florida.
And of course, every day at noon, I stop everything that I'm doing to go ahead and listen to the State of Cannabis Hour.
Thank you.
On Clubhouse, because
no, we are on Twitter Spaces now.
Oh, you're on Twitter Spaces now?
We are on Twitter Spaces every day.
I just clicked the damn link that comes in.
And we actually are changing the name. We are now going to be known as High at 9 News. That's right, everybody. High at 9
But we're the East
News.
Coast.
Well, now you know why it works for the East Coast too? Because in the East Coast, when it's 9 a.m. on the West Coast, it is high noon on the East Coast. So it all works with getting high.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Say hi to Rico and Susan, everybody, for me.
I will, definitely, without a doubt. But we will be on Twitter Spaces. You can find me at Jason Beck 420 on Twitter as well as on Instagram. And make sure that you turn in to the High at 9 News Show. 1 full hour of all of the most recent, relevant cannabis news that you need to know about, with in-depth discussions from industry insiders.
Great source of news. Jason, nice seeing you.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me. I really appreciate it, man. This is awesome. Love the work that you do out here in Florida, and keep kicking ass. We appreciate all the stuff you do.
I'm watching it.
Yes, right.
All right.
That's right.
Take care.
Baby. Always.
Let me get out of your way so you can move forward.
Yeah.